Joe Rosenthal, a photographer for the Associated Press, snapped a picture of the second flag raising that became not only the symbol of U.S. Marine Corps courage on Iwo Jima, but of the entire American war effort in World War II. On their way to bomb Japan, the B-29 crews couldn't see the island. It was far below them, often hidden by clouds. But they could detect the early warning radar down there. It would be sending the message back to Japan: the American bombers are coming. The B-29s were on their way from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. The island below was just a speck in the ocean, 650 miles south of Tokyo. But some unfortunate crews got a closer look. Returning with smoking engines, wings full of holes, wounded crewmen, low on fuel, they were now at low altitude, throwing out anything that could be unbolted to lighten their planes. They were hoping to make it home and not crash in the waiting ocean. Now they saw below them an ugly volcanic island. No paradise with palm trees here. The small island looked gray and brown and black, only 4 miles long, narrowing to the south end where the tall cinder cone of an extinct volcano jutted upwards. Looking at their maps, the navigators could see they were crossing over the island of Iwo Jima, Sulphur Island. They were still over 700 miles from home. They wished they could land, have a chance to refuel, repair their planes, and get the wounded much-needed medical attention. But Iwo Jima was a Japanese stronghold, so instead the gunners watched apprehensively for Japanese fighter planes said to be based there. Iwo Jima had become a thorn in the side of the United States bombing campaign against Japan. A decision was made. The Marine Corps would invade. Iwo Jima had been occupied by the Japanese military since 1914. At the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, there were only 1,400 Japanese servicemen on the island, mostly Navy personnel. In 1943, an airfield was built, and 1,500 naval airmen and 20 aircraft were moved to the island. With the American invasion of the Marshalls, Imperial headquarters realized it would have to build up its inner defenses.
The Japanese saw that it was of interest to the Americans from repeated raids there and some adjacent islands. They probably for their own strategic reasons felt that they needed to set up a major defensive barrier on this island, this really very small volcanic island.
General Tadamichi Kurabayashi was the Japanese commander on Iwo Jima. Trained as a cavalryman, he had been stationed in the United States from 1927 to 1930. Kurabayashi carefully studied radio reports from previous American amphibious invasions, particularly reports from the commander on Peleliu, who ordered his men to take advantage of the terrain and carry out strong counterattacks from previously planned and prepared positions. Peleliu proved to be a very expensive island to take, as the Marines there were faced by Japanese defenders dug into a maze of volcanic caves and ravines. This too was going to be Kurabayashi's strategy. American intelligence based on decoded Japanese radio messages, aerial photographs, and observations from submarines gave them a clear indication that the island was being fortified. But the size of the Japanese garrison and the extent of its underground defenses and tunnel networks remained a mystery. And as it turned out, the Japanese strength on the island was underestimated by nearly 70%. While the Marine and naval planners might not have known exactly what they were up against, they didn't plan to take any chances. The bombers came first. B-17s and B-24s appeared over Iwo Jima for the first time in August and September of 1944, beginning a sporadic pounding that would continue for nearly 6 months. The first strikes by carrier aircraft began in December to add to the increasing tonnage of bombs cascading onto the small island from Army Air Corps bombers. But the aerial bombing could only do so much. The dirty job of securing Iwo Jima belonged to the Marines. Expecting the operation to take from 3 to 10 days, the Marines were in for an unpleasant surprise. With tens of thousands of Japanese hiding underground, thousands of mines and artillery pieces covering every square foot of the island, high ground dominated by invisible Japanese snipers, and virtually no place to take cover, it would take the Marines over a month of brutal non-stop combat to secure this tiny volcanic island. A force of 6 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, and 1 light cruiser, supplemented by the lighter guns of destroyers and innumerable smaller craft, pounded Iwo Jima for 3 days and nights. Nearly 10,000 16, 14, 12, 8, and 6-inch shells slammed into the island, throwing up fountains of volcanic ash and cinders. The Marines just out of boot camp couldn't imagine that anything could live under such fire. But the older Leathernecks had seen massive bombardments before. They knew from experience that while the naval bombardments looked impressively devastating, in reality, they had little effect. Now they were wondering, hoping, will it be different this time?
But we got aboard that craft and we went in and we hit the beach, and I forget what it was, either the second or third wave, but it was real early on. And I had a base plate for the 81 millimeter mortar, weighed 85 pounds, and that was my baby. Do a lot of praying. You do a lot of praying.
Sitting on the southernmost tip of Iwo Jima, the volcanic cone of Mount Suribachi rose nearly straight up, completely dominating the landing beaches. It was the job of the 28th Marine Regiment of the 5th Marine Division to take it. They finally reached the top on February 23rd, raising first a small flag they carried with them, and then later a larger one from an LST. Joe Rosenthal, a photographer for the Associated Press, snapped a picture of the second flag raising that became not only the symbol of U.S. Marine Corps courage on Iwo Jima, but of the entire American war effort in World War II.
While we were there, they put the big flag up. Rosenthal, I think his name was Rosenthal, the guy who took the picture, you know, they always said that was staged, but it wasn't. He was standing there talking to a guy, and this guy says, "Oh my God," he said, "they're putting the flag up." And he turned around and snapped the picture. Not even looked. And that's what he got.
The Marines paid a heavy price to take the 8 square miles of stinking volcanic soil. 5,885 Marines were killed on Iwo Jima, and another 17,272 were wounded. Taking care of the wounded were the corpsmen. The corpsmen were part of the Navy, and it was their job to crawl out under fire and retrieve the wounded, give them first aid, and get them back to the surgical hospitals. The corpsmen suffered heavy casualties and were dearly loved by the Marines they served.
It was just as noisy at night as it was in the daytime. Then the volume of noise was almost ear-splitting at times. It varied, the pitch of it varied, but there was never a time that there wasn't massive combat noise.
Finally, it was over. After 36 days of continuous banging, crashing, and exploding, the silence was nearly deafening. With scores of crippled B-29s forced to land at Iwo, and with P-51 fighters now within range of Japan, the reason to take Iwo Jima seemed logical. But what the battle did to the U.S. Marines who fought it and survived is too often overlooked. It is painful, but fairly simple to count the dead and wounded. What is harder to measure is the hidden costs.